Good morning, everyone. If you could take a few minutes to grab your seat, grab something to drink, grab something to eat. In the meantime, I'm going to get started. My name is Craig Willingham. I'm the Deputy Director here at the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. We are housed here at the Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. Our institute is a research and action center that works on a wide variety of food policy related topics, including the one that we're going to be discussing today. We have monthly forums, and for many of you this might be your 10th or 12th forum. For some of you it might be your first forum. Either way, welcome both new attendees and veterans. Today we're going to be talking a bit about strategies for confronting epidemics of fear and hunger. And fear and hunger, particularly for vulnerable populations, is not a new thing in New York or nationally for that matter. But what we see with this current administration is a new kind of fear, a new kind of urgency that is much more a product of the way in which this current administration is implementing policies or threatening to implement policies in many cases. And that's created a bit of a problem for folks who typically are talking about these issues and connecting with at-risk populations, in that it affects their ability to be able to effectively communicate what's coming down the road. And one of the things that we think is going to be important for the next 2 years at the very least, but likely much longer than that, is coming up with a new way to both communicate about the issues that are coming down the pike, and also to be able to find out how we can have a very clear understanding of what's happening, but also reassert some position of authority for advocates and others in New York City and around the country. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Jan Popendek over there in just a minute, but in the meantime I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. We have 2 new reports that came out in the last month and a half or so. If you're interested, you can download them from our website. We also have executive summaries over there. The first is a guide to growing good food jobs, which just came out last week, which looks at the various pathways by which jobs that provide decent benefits, that have some sort of trajectory for advancement within the food sector. It provides a view of the different pathways that folks who are interested in going into that sector can take in order to take advantage of some of the emerging markets in food jobs. And the second report, which came out about a month ago, looks at ending food insecurity on CUNY campuses and covers some of the strategies that a group of students that we've been working with over the last 6 or 7 months, the CUNY food security advocates, have utilized in order to connect with their fellow students around issues related to food insecurity. And it also provides lessons for other academic institutions to be able to figure out what makes sense for them and how to address this epidemic of food insecurity on college campuses. And again, if you want to learn more about both these topics, you can download these reports from our website. Lastly, we have 2 events coming up in the next month. One, which is very closely related to the topic that we'll be discussing today, is a public information session on public charge, and it's really targeted at folks who are likely to be impacted by the proposed changes, and for those who are interested in communicating, what are the sorts of things that folks who are going to be affected by these changes should be mindful of. We're doing this in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and it'll be a sort of open question forum so that anyone who's interested in finding out, what are their rights, what are the sorts of things they should be mindful of, they should attend. And we hope that any of you, if you know someone who may be interested in this forum, that you spread this information session, that you spread the word. It's going to be from 6 to 9 on November 9th. And lastly, we have our next Urban Food Policy Forum, which is going to be on November 29th, and looking at what are the sorts of things advocates, policymakers, and others should be thinking about in terms of the next election, big election in 2020, and also what are the sorts of things we can look towards with this new Congress that's going to be coming in, that we hope will look radically different from the Congress that we have now. Lastly, I just want to mention that outside there's a water fountain, and also the bathrooms are directly to your right once you go out the store. And I'm happy to see so many familiar faces here today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Moderate from my left. Right, okay. So I want to add my note of welcome. It's good to see such a full room, and I want to welcome our panelists. One reason that we print up panelist bios is so that we don't spend a lot of time giving credentials, but I am really pleased to welcome Hannah Matthews, who is the Deputy Executive Director for Policy at CLASP, the Center for Law and Social Policy. I'm happy to welcome Nick Buse, who is the Community Mobilization Manager at the Food Bank for New York City. I'm very happy to welcome Evelyn Vela, who has worked in community mobilization for 6 years and is now at the New York Common Pantry. And she and Professor Nick Freudenberg, whom most of you are familiar with, the founder and director of the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute, will be sharing a slot. So we have 4 bodies, but 3 presentations. Here's the format for this morning. Our presenters are going to take up to 10 minutes per presentation to give you the basics. I'm going to start the questioning with some questions, and then I'm going to open the floor to you to question, but we're going to organize the questions in topics. And then at the end there will be an exercise, and that will be explained to you during Nick and Evelyn's presentation. Okay, so Hannah, could we start with you, and would you like to use the podium?
Great. Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. I'm going to talk today about a new rule proposed recently by the Trump administration. We refer to it as public charge. And I'm going to explain what is a very complicated rule, but the short version to take away is that we know that this rule is very likely, and in fact already has, increased fear among immigrant families about accessing basic needs programs that support their family's health and nutrition and well-being. This is a proposal that we've actually been expecting for some time. There have been leaked versions of earlier drafts starting back in straight after the been ready. And CLASP and the National Immigration Law Center partnered to form a campaign called Protecting Immigrant Families Campaign. We are thrilled that we now have more than 275 active members in 30 states and growing, groups here in New York that are also working on the campaign. So I'm going to share today both what's in the proposed rule, but also how you all can work to fight back against this. And there's lots more information at the link on the website there, protectingimmigrantfamilies.org. So what is public charge? According to the statute and what is in guidance today, public charge is a long-standing provision in immigration law that's really about identifying an individual who is likely to become primarily dependent on the government for subsistence. The public charge test can essentially be made when an individual is looking to come to the United States to enter the U.S., and also when an immigrant is looking to change their status to get lawful permanent residence, so essentially a green card. It's really important to remember that it is not relevant when an individual is applying for citizenship. That's been a misconception as this rule has rolled out. And it also doesn't apply to certain categories of immigrants, including refugees and asylees. So again, for those working directly with immigrant families, lots more information to know about who this would impact directly. So let me start with where we are today. Current guidance considers the use of just 2 public benefits in making that determination around public charge. So one is the receipt of cash assistance for income maintenance, and the second is long-term institutional care at the government's expense. And that's it. It also makes clear that there is no single factor that can determine whether a person is likely to become a public charge. So in addition to the receipt of benefits, the Department of Homeland Security would look at the totality of circumstances, other factors that may or may not lead someone to likely become primarily dependent on the government. And because of this narrow definition, we've essentially been able to send a clear message to immigrant families for years that using public benefits and programs not only helps their own family meet their health and nutrition needs, but also helps them move to more economically stable circumstance in the future. And so in fact has lots of benefits for them. There are many changes in this proposed rule. It's several hundred pages long, and it would dramatically change this entire concept of who can be and who it would be a public charge. The first way it changes this is it changes the actual definition. So rather than making an assessment as to whether someone would become primarily dependent, it changes that definition to just include an individual who has received a public benefit. So just using a benefit itself would make someone a public charge. The list of benefits then has been expanded. So in addition to those first 2 that I already mentioned, non-emergency Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly called food stamps, housing assistance, and Medicare Part D prescription subsidies. This is a dramatic change in what has been in place for decades. It also would, next slide here. It also does a number of things to actually be more specific about those circumstances and other factors that would influence whether or not someone could be deemed a public charge. So it essentially defines heavily weighted positive and negative factors that would weigh against an individual in the public charge test. You can see here on the right side of the scale there, the lack of a job, not being employed, having a health condition that would require someone to have medical assistance and not be able to pay for it themselves, or the receipt of a public benefit are all heavily weighted negative factors. There is in fact just one heavily weighted positive factor, and that is whether or not an individual or household income is above 250% of the federal poverty level. Now that's about $63,000, and it's higher than the median income in the United States. So you can see that this is not just an attack on immigrants, this is specifically an attack on low-income immigrants. To just give a couple more examples of kind of the list of factors here, each one of these now has negative factors that are very explicit in the proposed rule. So you can see here, being too old or too young. It actually says in the proposed rule that because a child can't work, they would likely to become a public charge. So age is a negative factor. Health, another one. Again, being diagnosed with a medical condition that may interfere with your ability to work is now a negative factor. And the list goes on. Limited English proficiency is a negative factor. Household size, so whether you have children or dependent family members living with you, that's a negative factor. It goes on and on. History and recent experience tell us that the impacts of this rule will be far-reaching and well beyond even the individuals who may be subject to a public charge test, right? So because of the complexity of immigration law, because of confusion around what benefits may be in or out of the rule, and just the fear that is pervasive in this country right now, we know it's likely that millions and millions of individuals will be held back from accessing programs, not just Medicaid, not just SNAP, not just housing, but likely a long list of other programs that support their families because of fear of consequences. And we've already seen this in some cases, particularly in SNAP and WIC, seeing families withdrawing from benefits. One estimate now puts the number at 26 million people nationally who may be impacted by this rule, again, because of widespread fear and that chilling effect on accessing other programs. Here in New York City, the mayor's office has done an estimate here that up to 475,000 immigrants who may seek LPR status in the future could be negatively impacted by the rule. And as well, hundreds more that, again, would be fearful of accessing other programs. Just to kind of underscore how harmful this rule would be, in fact, the Department of Homeland Security itself lists all of these harmful outcomes: obesity, increased use of emergency rooms, increased poverty rates, housing instability as outcomes that they anticipate of this proposal. Clearly, the rule favors wealthy immigrants. It blocks others from having a permanent, secure future in the United States. I mentioned the increased fear, and clearly the rule just is in direct conflict with a large body of research on the long-term positive benefits of accessing SNAP and Medicaid and other benefits that really support children and families and move families into better economic circumstance. So again, really, this rule looking to dramatically change immigration as well as the circumstance of people living in this country. I just want to flag, this is a proposal. So current guidance is in effect until then. That's really important if you're working with immigrant families to let them know that the actual rules have not yet changed. Final rule could look different. We hope we never get to a final rule, but if we do, we don't know exactly what would be in it, and it may never be finalized. And the good news about having a proposed rule is that, in fact, there is a public comment period, and so the public plays a very important role in that. Thus, the federal law actually says that every unique comment must be read and considered. So we have now a massive undertaking to make sure that we get in as many unique comments as possible by December 10th, which is when the rule period closes. And this is where you should, again, go to the website, protectingimmigrantfamilies.org, for more information. Everyone in this room can submit an individual comment. You can do that directly through a link on this website. You can do it today, and you can ask all of your people in your networks to do it. We also have an extensive strategy around templates and comments for folks to be able to modify from their own perspective. So there will be sector-based comments. So if you're coming from a health perspective, nutrition, faith-based, we have about 40-some sectors that are developing template comments. So again, I encourage you to link up with the campaign and really get that information out to your networks so that we can make sure to ask the administration to withdraw the rule, but also slow it down by having this enormous response of public comments. So thanks very much, and look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Hannah. That was back to our T2. That was very clear and very scary. So I don't know about you, but since the public charge rule was posted, draft rule, I have been kind of obsessed with it. But in fact, it's not the only threat to the future of food security in New York City. So we've asked Nick Buse from the Food Bank for New York City to tell us what's going on with the Farm Bill.
Hi, everyone. I don't have a slide presentation, so maybe I'll sit here and we can be kind of conversational about it. So like Jan said, my name is Nick Buse. I'm the Community Mobilization Manager at the Food Bank for New York City. And what that means is I have a really cool job. I get to learn about and share a lot of information about food policies that affect the Anti-Hunger Food Network. So we work with about 1,000 partner organizations that are food pantries and soup kitchens, senior centers, schools, and what unifies all of us is that primarily we are serving food to people for free. So people come to a food pantry or soup kitchen, and they can receive food to take home, or at a soup kitchen, a prepared meal. There's different types of work that that Food Bank for New York City does, just like any other food bank across the country also does, that has to do with sort of the populations that we're serving, the people that our members or folks that run emergency food programs see every day. So some of them you might expect. We do nutrition education programming, both in that context, but also in New York City schools. So we train teachers to implement a nutrition education program. It's called Cook Shop. It's really cool. Little kids tearing apart kale and leafy greens as I think they call it an explorer, and they look at it under a microscope. It's lovely. But we also run a really massive free tax preparation program that is powered primarily by volunteers. So it's a volunteer income tax assistance program. And that program brings over $100 million back into the pockets of New Yorkers, many of whom qualify for the earned income tax credit. So as a network, we distribute about, I think, 58 million meals annually to charitable organizations across the city. And we're not the only source of food for many food pantries and soup kitchens. So you have to imagine the sort of scale of service and also the scale of need. We do some other really cool stuff, but I won't talk too much about it because I was invited to talk about the Farm Bill. So you might be thinking, okay, you're distributing food at food pantries and soup kitchens. You're doing tax preparation, nutrition education. What do you care about farming, of course? So I'm used to talking to a room of people who don't know about the Farm Bill, but I think this room might be a little bit different. So show of hands, have you heard of the Farm Bill? Most people are. Are you following the Farm Bill? Farm Bill progress? Fewer people. Okay, cool. So let me talk a little bit sort of about why we care about it as a food bank. Let me talk a little bit about the sort of history of the Farm Bill and sort of what the status is. So the Farm Bill has 12 titles that control lots of federal policy about the food chain in the country and also some pieces internationally. So those titles have to do with, as you would expect, farming. So that has to do with commodities purchasing and conservation, supports for people who are producing food. And that the origins of those programs come out of the 1930s during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. Those programs were designed and continue to help mitigate the risk of producing food. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get a crop. Lots of things can go wrong. It's not a guarantee that there's going to be stable prices. So the Farm Bill initially was designed for those farming priorities. Now the food stamp program is also part of the Farm Bill. And there's other nutrition programs that are in Title IV of the Farm Bill. That's the modern Farm Bill. And the food stamp program has been around for a long time, or SNAP as we call it today. But it wasn't until the 1970s that these agriculture pieces and these nutrition pieces were combined into sort of what we think of as the modern Farm Bill, so that has all 12 titles. So I'm going to talk mostly about the nutrition title, which is Title IV, if you're interested. So in the 1970s is when this piece of legislation came together, and that's kind of what we know of it today. And it includes a variety of nutrition-related programs. As a food bank, we are concerned about the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. So that's federal dollars that go to food pantries and soup kitchens. It's an important piece of the food distribution system at food pantries and soup kitchens across the country. I think 1 in 5 meals that's served at a food pantry or soup kitchen is provided through that program. So it's a really significant piece. But much, much bigger than that, of course, is SNAP. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It dwarfs the Emergency Food Network. In New York City, SNAP provides more meals in 2 months than the Emergency Food Network in New York City does all year. And we have a strong, robust emergency food system. Across the country, that number is in 1 month. SNAP provides more meals in 1 month, so 12 times as many meals as a food pantry or soup kitchen or these larger sort of last lines of defense against hunger. So SNAP is a massive and effective first line of defense against hunger for people who are food insecure, for low-income people. It is also the majority of the dollars that are described within the Farm Bill. It's about 80% of the dollars that are spent on programs within the Farm Bill are spent on SNAP. So you can imagine this is important for anybody who's working on anti-hunger programs. We say in the food banking world sometimes you can't food bank your way out of bad policy, which is why we're concerned about some of the proposals that are coming out of Washington right now, because the Farm Bill, which is reauthorized every 5 years, is up for reauthorization. Every 5 years is a little bit of a optimistic number. It was about 2 years late last time it was reauthorized. But currently Congress is under the process of trying to reauthorize this massive piece of legislation with all 12 of these titles, particularly right now before well, we can talk about the politics in a second. But let me back up and say sort of what the process has been so far. So about a year ago, the agriculture committees from the House and the Senate started having public hearings for advocates, for professionals, for community members to talk about the importance of the programs that are in the Farm Bill. So after those public hearings, the House and the Senate broke into their respective agriculture committees that oversee this piece of legislation, and they came up with two very different versions of a Farm Bill. The House version, H.R. 2, and the Senate version, forget the bill number. But I'll talk about those differences, but the House passed their version after 2 votes, and the Senate passed their version after 1 vote. And the House passed a version that is designed to take benefits away from low-income people, to take food out of the refrigerators, off of the dinner table of people who are low-income. The Senate version largely maintains the current legislation and doesn't take those benefits away from people. It's worth noting that the House version was passed narrowly and along partisan lines, and the Senate version was passed with a large margin in a bipartisan fashion. So let's talk about what the differences are. The House Farm Bill proposes to take away benefits kind of in an insidious way. And there's 3 main ways that the House Farm Bill is structured to take those benefits away. One, by increasing the amount of work that people have to are required to do to receive benefits. So currently, if you are a SNAP recipient, you are subject to a 3-month work requirement. So you have to work within a 3-month period, otherwise you lose benefits. There's exceptions to that, depending on your household situation and also depending on whether your state has applied for a waiver. But there are work requirements in the current legislation. The House proposal proposes to make that a 1-month time limit. So if you don't get work within 1 month, you get stripped of your benefits. And this is important for people who are low income because often work doesn't look like a 9 to 5. Work is inconsistent, and maintaining that work requirement can be really, really difficult. It's also a 20-hour-a-week work requirement, so it's not an insufficient amount of work. The second way that the House version proposes to take benefits away from people is by by taking away the Heat and Eat program. And this is a program that is designed for people who are who get a public benefit for heating costs, for energy costs, home energy costs. And the third way is to eliminate broad-based categorical eligibility. And this is a program that states can opt into. Sometimes people call it the state option. But what it says is that for people who are living in households with incomes above 130%, you might still be able to qualify for SNAP benefits. But if you kind of have to get in the door, you kind of have to sit down and have your budget, your SNAP benefits budget done. And currently, if you have a senior in your household or you have dependents in your household, depending on which state you live in and kind of how it's structured, you can still kind of get in the door to apply for benefits all the way up to about 200% of the federal poverty limit, which is not a lot of money. Remember, this is still fairly low income. And the House version proposes to eliminate that option. It says you can't make more net income than 130% of the federal poverty limit for most families. So those three changes would eliminate about $20 billion of benefits from the SNAP program in the Farm Bill. And this is the Congressional Budget Office's number. This is not my number. This is Congress telling Congress what how much benefits are going to be taken away. Sorry. So it's important to note here that some people will say that the House proposals are cost neutral. And that's because those $20 billion are, the proposal is to put those monies into the administration of the program, largely through the expansion of some workforce development programs to an insufficient amount of programming. And it expands the bureaucratic burden of all this expanded work requirements. Now people have to come in and certify that they're working on a monthly basis. So all those $20 billion that you're taking away in food benefits, you are putting onto bureaucracy. So it doesn't make sense for people. So fortunately, there's an alternative. The Senate's version maintains benefit eligibility and structure. So can I have 2 more minutes? Sorry. So briefly, with these 2 different pieces of legislation, the House and the Senate have now convened a conference committee. And the conference committee has to navigate these 2 very different pieces of legislation. And the sticking points are really largely around the SNAP program. So it's important that as we continue to be advocates and educators and people who are providing services, that we continue to elevate the importance of maintaining not just SNAP benefits, but eligibility criteria, because that's the way that the House is trying to kind of undermine the SNAP program. And I think there's a few ways that we can do that. One is elevating the notion of SNAP. I think of SNAP as a national treasure. It is an incredibly effective, powerful program in preventing hunger for millions of people across the country, 40 million people across the country. So when we talk about it, we need to talk about it as a crown jewel of our society. It is extremely important. The second thing is to, of course, talk to your members of Congress about the importance of it, but importantly also talk to your friends and family who are in states that have agriculture committee leadership. So you can look that up, but there's the majority leader and the ranking member from the House and the Senate, and they're both largely responsible for this negotiation during the conference committee. So what this looks like after the election is kind of anybody's guess, but they may revisit the Farm Bill, but it may also drag on for a while, so they may continue to kick the can on the Farm Bill. So the last thing that I'll say is don't look away from it. So part of the strategy of anybody trying to undermine something is to put it in a corner and to make people distracted with everything else. So we have to not look away and not let SNAP and all the other important nutrition programs that are in the Farm Bill be shoved in the corner and get passed in the middle of the night with draconian cuts that will take food away from low-income people.
Another clear and scary presentation. I guess it's Halloween is on my mind. Okay, let me turn it over to Nick and Evelyn to talk about a proposal for responding to these epidemics.
So what I will get started and just provide, a little bit of perspective from, pantry services. So from the New York Common Pantry perspective, we have already seen a lot of fear and misinformation, which is causing a whole array of problems. Our SNAP outreach team and case managers have seen a drop in SNAP enrollment. About 1 in 3 pantry members are choosing to either not enroll in SNAP membership or SNAP benefits, or to not enroll, or basically choose to decline services if they were getting them previously. So this is problematic because of all the reasons that Nick mentioned. SNAP has the ability to catch many, just like an exponentially large amount of people when compared to emergency food relief organizations. So it is really important that, from the point of advocacy, we do try to protect these programs. Our case managers have also expressed a little bit of frustration when being asked about the public charge rule because they don't know the full extent of the consequences. So, it's really hard for us to tell pantry members what is going to happen when we don't know exactly what the long-term reach of this rule will be. When people come to sign up for pantry services, sometimes they won't even ask questions about SNAP. And we do have to, we try to screen them for as many benefits as possible so that they receive as much help as they can. But a lot of time they will not even ask questions in fear of maybe they might feel like they're being put on the spot, or like, something about their immigration status might come up, and that's going to compromise the services that they receive, or even worse, compromise their legal status or their immigration status in the future. So we are seeing definitely a drop of number in people that are receiving SNAP, and that's also creating or putting a burden on pantry services, especially in pantries, Common Pantry Bronx, which is a brand new pantry that we opened last year. Since we opened that pantry, we have seen the number of people we serve duplicate, and we are seeing the numbers of people that we serve in Common Pantry East Harlem drop. And that's probably due to changes in demographics. A lot of people are leaving East Harlem. Cost of living is rising in East Harlem. We're also seeing less people apply for Section 8 vouchers, which is also contributing to people leaving the area, and we are seeing more homelessness, and obviously all of these problems are public health problems that are related to food insecurity, and could really become problematic for all New Yorkers due to the size of it, the reach of it. So.
Good morning. As always, it's an honor to speak with a group so committed to improving food security and health of people here in New York and the nation. Almost 2 years ago, before the 2016 election, our institute began to study the obstacles that immigrants were facing in using the food benefits that our city and country had constructed really over the last century, which you've heard about from our previous speakers. We were concerned that some of the progress that New York City and the U.S. had made in reducing food insecurity, and between 2014 and 2016, there was a reduction in the number of food insecure people in New York City by several hundred thousand. And that's progress that those organizations in the room today and changes in city, state, and federal policy helped to bring about. We were concerned that that progress was at risk. And after the election, our fears grew as one policy after another was announced by the new Congress and administration designed to cut back safety net programs and impose new restrictions on immigrants and immigration. We were determined not to watch an epidemic of hunger and its documented harmful health and social consequences unfold before our eyes. And so we convened several food security and immigrants' rights organizations, many in the room today, to see if together we could develop an emergency response to this growing threat. Our actions were based on the belief that we had an opportunity to articulate another approach to food insecurity and immigration than the one that we were seeing coming from Washington. And this opportunity had three dimensions. First, it was a political opportunity. In the last 2 or 3 years, New York City's mayor, governor, city council, and many members of our state legislature had articulated a desire on the policies of hate and fear coming from Washington. Could we use that desire to create a New York answer to the Trump proposals? And in doing so, could we show other cities and states and learn from their similar efforts that we heard about from Hannah, an alternative to increasing hunger and food insecurity to deter immigration? And that's the articulated goal of the Trump administration, to take parents' concerns about their children, immigrants' concerns about their children's well-being to deter people from coming to this country. A more odious ethical position I can't imagine. Second, as health and nutritional professionals, we wanted to honor the precautionary principle that states when solid evidence points to a potential threat to health, and Hannah showed us that even the Department of Homeland Security acknowledges that there is such a threat, that we are going to see bodies pile up, that we act rather than wait for those bodies to accumulate. Learning from our inadequate response to the homelessness crisis precipitated in the early 1980s by the Reagan administration's decision to end direct federal support for federal housing, a decision which contributed to the epidemics of tuberculosis, the acceleration of the HIV epidemic, the epidemic of crack cocaine use in this city that continue to trouble us today. Could we come up with a response to policies designed to increase food insecurity by acting to prevent these consequences? And third, from a moral perspective, could we show New York and the nation that as a people, we still believed in the fundamental American values of feeding the hungry and welcoming immigrants? That we in New York were willing to act to demonstrate these values even when the federal government sought to undermine them. Based on these principles, a group has been meeting for several months, and we've developed a proposal that I'll briefly outline for you now. It's a work in progress, and in making this plan, we're hoping that we can enact it soon, ideally in the coming fiscal year, and that we can see the full scope before we see the full scope of the consequences of the proposed cuts in food benefits. Our proposal for a city and state New York Food Security Innovation Act has these goals. First, it will increase funding for established and new activities to increase access to public food benefits in New York City and state, with a special focus on programs that will be accessible to New York's immigrant communities. Second, we'll provide additional funding using established funding streams such as New York City's Emergency Food and Nutrition Assistance Program, FNAP, forgive the acronyms, the City Council's School Food Pantry Initiative, the New York State FNAP, and perhaps others. Third, it will support new and existing collaboratives to strengthen the infrastructure of organizations providing food security assistance. And fourth, its support will be dedicated to reducing the obstacles that have been documented to deter immigrants from using services, including requirements for extensive documentation, fear of gathering in public places where immigration agents may wait, and fear of incurring public charge sanctions. In 2017, the city and state spent about $40 million in FNAP, HIPNAP, and the City Council initiative. Much more was spent in federal funds, of course. We have not yet reached agreement on the dollar amount to ask for next year, but we should be asking, what would a 10% increase, what would a doubling of what New York City and state spends now achieve, and how could it help to reduce food insecurity? We welcome your thoughts on specifying an amount that is meaningful in reducing food insecurity and yet politically feasible. Our working group has identified a few possible avenues for investing these new funds, and we're going to ask you to rank them in the exercise at the end of this session today. And these include offering new fruit and vegetable incentives through organizations serving immigrant populations, possibly using the New York City ID card as the vehicle, increasing funding for emergency food programs, and giving them new resources for online food ordering and home deliveries, approaches that encourage immigrants to use these services, and for increased outreach and education, and supplementing federal programs like summer meals to include city and state funded additional food for the families of immigrant children, for the families of school children. We also want to support communications campaigns designed to inform people about available services and reduce the stigma associated with immigration and food benefits. We hope to submit our proposal to the New York Security Innovation Act in the coming weeks or months. And we ask for your feedback, your participation in shaping the ask, and we hope your support in convincing public officials in the city and state to act now. We acknowledge the limitations of this short-term strategy. We don't want to increase dependence on emergency food programs that do not address the underlying causes of food insecurity, which is the inequitable allocation of income and wealth and the persistence of poverty in this city. We also acknowledge that by turning to the city and state governments, they have one, to diminish the belief that we can count on the federal government to protect the American people from threats to our well-being. But we believe the opportunity to address an unfolding crisis now, and we believe that the experience and wisdom of the organizations in this room and the others like us is sufficient to craft a proposal in a way that will minimize these risks. And we believe that the moral urgency of acting to avoid a predictable crisis overwhelms this caution. Thank you.
Okay, so we have two tasks to accomplish in the time that we have left this morning. We have an opportunity for you to select your favorite of the proposals that are embedded in the New York Food Security Innovation Act. And you'll see some blank posters on the wall back there, but when the time comes, those will be flipped and they won't be blank anymore, and you will each get one sticky to use to vote for your priority. So we want to leave time at the end to do that. So let me move ahead quickly with the questioning. I'm going to start with a couple of questions for Megan related to the public charge thing, and then I'm going to open it for public charge related questions. Then I'm going to close it and move on to Farm Bill related, and the same procedure with the proposal. So let me start with a question about the comments in the responding to the public charge. First off, can an individual submit more than one comment, or is it one to a customer?
Interesting question. I believe that you can submit more than one. The important issue here is that there are unique comments. So it is that when the comments come in, the federal government must review and consider every comment. So it doesn't so much matter that you could say what you have to say in one comment and put all your points in versus submitting multiple times, but because it's really not about that sheer number, it's about what the comment actually is. So as much as we want a massive quantity, we want a massive quantity of unique comments. So really it is the content. And sharing whatever perspective you have is really, really critical. So from your perspective of how it would impact a family that you know, maybe you're a teacher and you would talk about the consequences of increased food insecurity on education. Maybe you're, come from a medical perspective. So the importance is here that we have a diverse set of voices with lots of different perspectives on how harmful this is.
And you'll forgive me for calling you Megan when your name is Hannah. But you knew who I meant. Okay. One additional question for me. I thought that I ought to submit my comment before I came to moderate this panel this morning. So I did it yesterday. And I did it through the Federal Register. And that portal works. But is there an advantage to doing it through the Protecting Immigrant Families website?
There's no advantage. The portal on the Protecting Immigrant Families website goes directly into the Federal Register, so it's the place that all of the comments are collectively received. The advantage here is that it's a little bit more user-friendly website, so particularly for individuals who hadn't had experience using the Federal Register before, this is a little bit more comfortable way to submit comments. One other piece that I want to add, because this is important for people who are getting comments from community members, is that the rule is explicit that comments all must be received in English.
while we don't support that qualification, we do want to make sure that everybody's comment is considered. So if you are working with families who want to write comments in other languages, we encourage you to submit a translation of their comment. And there's some more information on the website about how to do that most appropriately.
And all comments must have a name attached.
They should have a name. It is possible to put anonymous in the, when you go to submit, it'll ask for a name, and you could put anonymous in it. We'd encourage folks to submit a name that will be more considered that way.
So let me open the floor to questions for Anna.
Hi, thank you for presenting. One of your slides mentioned that DHS is seeking to expand the new public charge rule or another rule change to include CHIP. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about that.
Right. So in the proposal that we're talking about, it lists the benefits that would be expanded under public charge, which is the non-emergency Medicaid, SNAP housing, and Medicare Part D. It does not include the Children's Health Insurance Program, but it specifically requests comments on whether or not they should include it. Another thing to note is that there is language in the rule that any benefits that are not included in the proposed rule would not be considered. So in other words, the list of benefits is meant to be finite. It wouldn't be that there would be additional programs. So a little bit about the commenting, and again, there's more information on our website. Folks are certainly welcome to say why it would be harmful to include the Children's Health Insurance Program, and as well as to include Medicaid. We don't want any of these programs included. We urge you not to name specific other programs in your comments. So generally talking about the importance of the specific programs that are included, as well as benefits broadly and attempts to help people financially, but we do not want you to list other programs that were not explicitly listed in the rules, so that they won't be added in a final rule.
Hi, my question was, I don't know if you're privy to this information, but I know WIC was initially on the table, and then it was taken off, and I don't know if it was because it was too egregious to kind of take food away from mothers and babies, or if it was from sort of public pressure or pressure in Congress, but I wonder if you had any insight into the strategies that were used to get that off the table, and if that would have any help getting other programs off the table this time.
That's a great question. So I can't say specifically why. It is true that WIC, as well as other programs, were named in earlier draft versions, extensive lists of other programs. So a couple of things. One is that we should believe that a united strategy against this rule actually can stop it. If you look at those earlier drafts, then there has been a narrowing of benefits. But I think it's really important not to compare this version, the one that was actually published, to prior versions, because in fact, compared to current law and guidance, it is awful and would have a lot of harm to people. So, I think we should continue speaking out about how important all of these programs are. We're certainly very happy that WIC and others aren't included in there, but as I said, until we get the rule withdrawn, we know that there will still be this dramatic impact on families. And because of these earlier versions that named other programs, we know that this is just really confused. There's a lot of confusion out there as to what's in or what's out that will have dramatic impacts.
Are there past or recent examples of rules being withdrawn? I remember the organic standards comments, that they were flooded with comments and they dramatically changed the content. Are there other hopeful precedents?
There are lots of examples. I think, we are in an interesting time where there will be lots of different strategies to fight this rule, so we do expect that the content of a final rule could be shaped by public comments. We think that another strategy of the public comments is to raise this issue and the visibility of the issue for the public. And there are
lots of other ways that we can respond to the development of a rule, including whether or not Congress is in a position to take some action, future efforts. So I think there's lots of reasons to comment, both to shape a final rule, to stop a final rule from coming to be, and we'll continue to proceed from there.
Good. I think we, okay, one last...
Sorry, this will be pretty straightforward and quick. You said that it doesn't affect people seeking citizenship, but isn't a pathway to citizenship to first have a green card or have legal residency?
So it's just a matter of when the public charge test comes into play. So in other words, the public charge test for folks who are seeking LPR status now, that is when it would be considered. If there are individuals who have a green card and are looking to become citizens, then the public charge test is not applied. So
wow. So moving forward, then it would affect people even seeking citizenship, theoretically.
Certainly could.
So let's move on to some questions related to the farm bill. So let's see if I understand this. Congress went off to a campaign without having reached agreement on a conference report. The House and Senate versions have not been reconciled. So when Congress comes back after the election, what happens?
So a couple of things. One, I didn't note that the current legislation, which was passed in 2014, expired on September 30th of this year. So Congress kind of, most of the programs that are described in the Farm Bill continue as is. Some programs have gone away, particularly growers and or green markets related programs. I'm not super knowledgeable about those pieces, but by and large the big pieces are still active with the current or expired statute. So after November 6th, after the election, it's unknown what Congress doesn't have to take any action. They do have to take continuing resolution action to continue current statute, but aside from that, they can continue to kick that can down the road kind of as long as they want. To read the tea leaves is kind of a hard question. I think some people think that if the House flips, that there might be an incentive for them to push through a farm bill during the lame duck session. Other people, so some people think that if the House doesn't flip, then they might wait until the next term. So I don't have a great answer for that, unfortunately.
Other farm bill related questions. Well, while people are getting those together, I have another one, which is, if there is no farm bill this session, they don't do anything in the lame duck period except continuing resolution, what would be your priorities for a new farm bill in a new Congress? Let's say if the House flips.
So I work for a food bank, so I have to say that the federal dollars that go to emergency food programs are really important. And oddly, the House version proposes to increase that funding. So that funding is called TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program. The House version is also the version that proposes to strip many, many times more meals away from people by cutting the SNAP program. So we advocates who are working particularly with emergency food providers are always going to say that it's really important that we have a strong TFAP program. But simultaneously, we have to say that we can never accept a farm bill that diminishes SNAP, whether through benefits cuts or by changing eligibility structure so that fewer people can access a program, fewer low-income people can get food at grocery stores. I mean, this is simple things that I think that we're asking for as a priority. So the top priority really does have to be SNAP. I think the scale of food service, meals that are provided by SNAP kind of puts it really pretty clearly in perspective. SNAP and the Emergency Food Network and school meals and other types of programs that low-income people use to kind of get to fill their plate, so to speak, are work in tandem with one another. So we haven't exactly drawn this parallel to talk about immigration and the Emergency Food Network, but I think it's worth noting that people come to the Emergency Food Network and the Emergency Food Network is required to serve people regardless of any immigration status or anything like that. So, you know, these programs work in parallel, and they, even with programs, there's still a significant gap between the amount of food that households have and the amount of food that households need. So if you are food insecure in New York City alone, that gap is 200 million meals. It's significant. Across the state, it's 400 million meals. So for low-income families that are food insecure, you know, it takes a lot of resources to try to piece together survival resources, and, you know, food being central to that. So to answer your question, I think fundamentally rejecting the idea that that SNAP can be a negotiating chip is also really important. Sort of in the same vein of putting WIC on one proposal of public charge, we can't say, oh, well, this is a better version of public charge changes. No, that's not how it goes. So we can't say that because the House version happens to be stronger on emergency food, that it's acceptable to take food away from SNAP.
Any last Farm Bill related questions? This is more a comment than a question, since I want you to verify if it's accurate. That the threat to broad-based categorical eligibility is particularly problematic for places like New York City, where the cost of living is high.
Yeah, so broad-based categorical eligibility is this space where for families that have more than 130% of the federal poverty limit, you can still apply for benefits. You still have to net out at an eligibility level. But in places where the cost of housing is high, the cost of childcare is high, for households that have high medical costs, all those things contribute to your household budget that reduce the amount of money that you have available for your essential needs. So it is a smart way of kind of bridging between extremely low income to low income, and to get people so that they can kind of bridge over those hard times. And I think that the elimination of that is a really it's a really dumb way and a harmful way of taking benefits away from people, particularly in areas where there's high cost of living.
Not just leaving with food, but leaving with knowledge about the Farm Bill and knowledge about the risks of SNAP being removed and how they can impact their own community, because it is affecting them. It is affecting them the most, their communities, their neighbors, their family members. And I think it's very important, no matter what your income is, to always have access to knowledge about what can happen, like in this country, that things just wipe out and no one has no clue or any idea how to fight for it, or that it was even happening, And I don't think they don't want to know. I don't think anyone's telling them or giving them a heads up of what's to come. I think it's important that people do get the heads up. I know it's like they're nervous and there is a lot of fear and stigmatization of poverty, and people are silent. They just want to get them to run out. But there are some who are interested. So like, what's going on? I heard this. I saw this on the news. That's what people come to me, and I'm like, oh, okay. But I'm not a big food bank, or I'm not a huge agency that is meeting the people with low income on a daily basis. Do you see the importance of giving them this knowledge about the Farm Bill and what could possibly happen to SNAP?
Yeah, definitely. So I can say a few things about that. One, what unifies community-based organizations that are members of Food Bank is that we are delivering food. But many of those organizations, like Common Pantry, are doing a variety of services. And some of those locations are doing direct SNAP applications, or referring people to seek SNAP assistance or information about SNAP. So the connection to other benefits, also non-food benefits, is inextricable from that network of community-based service providers. So that's important, and so that the access to the information in terms of receiving benefits is built into the system. But so too is the opportunity for advocacy. So it's something that I explicitly work on, is educating the folks that are doing the direct service, from the person who's ordering food for the food pantry to the executive director who's trying to fundraise for the other types of services that are at an organization, educating folks and inviting folks to be to participate in that. So it is flooring to me when the Emergency Food Network goes beyond the food service, beyond the direct services that they're doing, and goes and sits in front of City Council and goes to Washington, D.C. and sits down with their elected officials and does this advocacy, because there's a lot of information there, so the Emergency Food Network in particular is engaged in that, and it's an honor that I have to be able to work with people to do that. And what part of that piece is also inviting clients to send messages, and that sort of education that comes along with talking to the people that you're serving about the issues, the decisions that elected officials are making, the policies and budgets that elected officials are making, people in power, and so that these issues are elevated in the sort of overall consciousness, I think, is important, and is something that I know we work on and we do. Yeah.
Real quick.
So I just wanted to add to that, because I think this is really important on the public charge as well. I think impacted communities need accurate information, and what's positive about the public comment period, at least, is that there are so many attacks on immigrants that people feel very helpless to do anything about. This is one where individuals can actually take an action step. So again, on the Protecting Immigrant Families website, there are talking points for immigrant communities, because we want to both give accurate information, but also make sure we're not contributing to a chilling effect and raising even more fear in communities. So I encourage you all to kind of figure out that balance, but I think it's very empowering for people to be able to submit a comment on this proposal.
Good. And if you'll pass that mic down here, we'll turn our questioning to our third presentation. And I'd like to know if there's any precedent for creating emergency funding stream to cope with an emerging problem.
Yes, I think there is. I can think of 3 examples. The response to Tropical Storm Sandy, where there was federal relief, but also both New York City and New York State added to that fund to enable communities in the city and state to respond more quickly and more fully, and to address some of the populations who weren't covered by the federal support. I think that's a very concrete example. A second example is the set of legislation to address the HIV epidemic in New York City, the Ryan White title. And again, there was federal funding to address a national problem, and then New York State and New York City decided to add funding. And the consensus, I think, among those of us who were involved in HIV work is that the combination of federal, state, and city funding significantly improved our response to the HIV epidemic. And then the third, perhaps most relevant example, is after Congress passed so-called welfare reform in the 90s, New York State authorized a special funding to continue to provide SNAP, then food stamps, to eligible populations. And I think the threat today is a little different from those previous ones. What we're facing is Tropical Storm Donald. And Tropical Storm Donald is a threat to New York City, is an immediate threat to our well-being, and we need to convince our city and state legislatures that this deserves a response. And in response to some of the previous questions, I think the Food Security Innovation Act provides an opportunity for activists and organizations working on food insecurity and those working on immigration to come together to work and succeed in getting new policy at the city and state level, and to use that new cohesiveness to then apply it at the federal level.
One quickie question, and then we'll open the floor to questions about the proposal. For the idea of the Wholesome Wave benefits card or the New York City ID card being loaded with food purchasing benefits. Did you see that as a temporary thing, and when would that cease, or did you see it as a permanent addition to the array of benefits addressing food insecurity?
I think that Food Security Innovation Act is seen as a short-term solution to the threats coming from Washington. And in the long term, the way we'll address food insecurity and inadequate access to healthy food in this city is by addressing income inequality and poverty. So those are the long-term solutions. And these short-term measures are a way to move us forward to make sure that we don't lose children and families while we're waiting for better policy. I think the putting fruit and vegetable incentives, we have experience doing that with health bucks. We know that it increases fruit and vegetable consumption. In the long term, I think creating incentives for healthy food would be a good addition to the portfolio of food problems. But how to do that, I think we'll need to figure out with experience.
So what we have seen from our pantry, just the number of people that we have been able to serve over the last 10 years, it correlates with what Nick is saying. Even though unemployment is supposed to be, back to pre-recession levels, we are still seeing a large number of people that are seeking services. So just to give you an idea, back in 2007, we were serving about 18,000 people a year total, and now we are serving about 2,000 people per week, and that's just Choice Pantry. So that is why we saw the need to open a second pantry in the Bronx, which has, like I mentioned before, already doubled in size. So the need is there. So it is really important to address the long-term objectives and to build a plan that is sustainable and is really addressing the bigger issues at hand.
Are there other questions about the proposal? So, yeah, thank you.
So one of the things I'm thinking when I'm hearing everyone, but especially the proposal, have been disenfranchised systematically not to be able to vote. So while we can educate these communities, we also have to make sure that we're empowering them to get to the polls and actually vote. So what is being done and what can we do to ensure that the follow-up is not only, the midterms that are next week, but the 2020 election, these same communities, these policies are impacting and devastating, are also getting to the polls and making sure their voices are being heard?
I can certainly second that as a suggestion, and I think for both our Food Security Innovation Act and broader, the election for the New York State Senate is particularly important, because if we're successful in flipping the Senate, the New York State Senate, Republican-controlled, has been a big obstacle to more progressive programs for the last several years, and there's the prospect of shifting that, and so that would be really important, and that's why we all need to vote on November 6th. And I think many organizations are doing both voter registration and voter turnout, and I don't know if I can say anything more specifically than for each of us to both at the individual level and the organizational level to ensure that we can do everything we can to have people turn out in 2 weeks to vote. And I also think your point about the 2020 election is important. I think another one of our goals in this Food Security Innovation Act is to keep the issue of food security and immigrants' rights on the political agenda so that those will be major issues in the 2020 election.
Put in a plug for our next forum.
And in our next forum, thank you, Jen, we will be looking at how can we use the 2020 election and the next 2 years to make sure that food security, healthy food access, protection of food workers are on the agenda in 2020. And we welcome everybody's thoughts on how to do that. I don't know if others want to.
I saw one additional question.
Hi, my question's for Evelyn. So I'm also working on a food pantry here in the city. I do SNAP outreach and enrollment, and I am consistently seeing since I've begun that people are scared about public charge. People are denying the benefit even when they qualify, even when they are legal permanent residents and this proposed rule would not affect them. Have you at the Common Pantry found any techniques to, I don't want to say convince, but almost to provide this, persuade almost people that this does not affect them when it doesn't? Do you have any specific language? And I'd also be interested to hear from anyone else who has an opinion or ideas on this from other organizations in the city, because it doesn't matter what I say, it seems.
Yeah, I totally get that. And what I got from the case managers that I talked to was that they were also frustrated from not being able to provide all the right information, because at this point the rule hasn't been implemented. So we really don't know what is going to happen. We don't know the full extent of the consequences of the rule. So we do try to steer away from telling them to trust what we're saying, because we truly don't know. All we can really do is try to connect them with as many services as possible that are not going to be potentially affected by the public health rule. And we do screen them for pantry services each time. So at least through regular pantry, we are still able to serve them and provide food for their families, and that's really where they are comfortable at now. Anything beyond that really creates a lot of hesitancy, and it's really, I understand your frustration, because there's really no bottom line explanation or answer that we can give them at this point.
You can come to the session that the mayor's office on immigrant are having. When is that one? November 9th. You may be able to explore this a little further. And I wondered if you had any response to that.
I don't know that it's a response that's sufficient to quell fears, because we know that they are real. But again, I think it's the accurate information. So as much as possible, explaining that in fact the rule would not be retroactive. So it is very clear that the use of benefits would not be considered until a date in the future after a final rule. So nothing has changed. And I think that's a piece that folks don't necessarily know. So making clear that in fact there is no advantage to disenrolling from benefits now because they would not be considered is just really important information. But again, more talking points on working directly with families are on the website, so I encourage you to take a look at those.
I'll make a plug for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, MOIA. Has a public charge landing page for New York City specific resources. Protecting Immigrant Families is amazing, and if you're not on the email list, you get on there right now, bring out your phone. But if you're looking for like a hotline, the Catholic Charities is running a hotline called the New Americans Hotline. That's a resource. There's some flyers in multiple languages on MOIA's website that kind of break down sort of the today's status, which is there's this proposal that is not enacted, and here's what it means.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, and we don't want to let you out of the room until you have voted. So let me explain again our glamorous assistants, is that what they say on those quiz shows, are just now revealing the posters. You get one sticky. You vote by attaching your sticky to the poster, the one that you find the proposal you find the most promising or that would be your highest priority. If you have more to say or you have other ideas that are not among the 6 that are available on posters, at the back table are some additional stickies, but you can't use them to vote twice, and some pens, and you can write us a note and stick it on that last poster on the left, the one with the question mark. So we have 6 components to the, and we'll get out of the way so that you can refresh your memory up here. Since everybody cannot vote at once, I encourage people who are closest to the wall to start, and I would encourage the rest of you to help us fight food waste and coffee waste by refreshing your refreshments at the back table, and know that our panelists are available for you to talk to on an interactive basis. So come up here and schmooze with the panelists, and as your time as the spot becomes available, go vote. Our assistants will give you each a sticky. Can we have a concluding round of applause for the panelists? And a special thanks to Hannah for traveling all the way from Washington to do this for us. Thank you.